Oh, hello. Morning. This part right here is enthusiastic. The rest of you guys need to catch up a little bit. Online, I didn't hear a thing. So, anyway, sometimes things come in your life and they kind of get you a little bit wonky. And today's a little wonky day anyway. You know, it's 9/11, so everybody in America was massively impacted by that. But almost everybody in this room was impacted in ways we can't even talk about. So we're all a little bit there. And then I may mention some more about that in a little bit, but I do want to first thank all you people who have sacrificed so much as a result of what happened then. I personally appreciate it. I'm honored to be able to pastor a church that of people who didn't just go, this happened, that's terrible, but this happened, that's terrible, let's do something about it. And I'm very honored by that. But this morning, I get up, and I use my tablet for my quiet time, my time with God every day. I read my Bible on it, my prayer list is on it. And, you know, you turn on, it's an iPad, and I turn it on, and Apple News pops up. And let's see if this will work. This was the news feed starting point. That one didn't want to, I just reconnected. There it is. This is a magazine. Should I prevent my daughter from playing with our evangelical neighbors? Now, I am, as you define the term evangelical, I pretty much fall under that umbrella, most of the ways you define it. And so I'm like, wow. There are people out there, and if you are a part of this church, you would be under that big umbrella of evangelical. There are people who would say, should I allow my children to play with your children? Do you know that? Why is that? What's going on here? Why is there such a negative connotation in so many people's eyes, such a sour taste in so many people's mouths about people that are, broadly, like us? What's going on? Well, believe it or not, it actually plays into what we're talking about today because we're doing this series. I really don't want to talk about this, and this fits in nicely with something I really don't want to talk about. So we're going to talk about it. Okay? And the reason I'm going to talk about it as we move forward fits in with what we talked about last week. We'll review real quickly last week, and then we'll just keep that moving into a new area today. And we started out with a passage in Timothy where Paul says to Timothy, the time will come when people will not put up with sound doctrine. Instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. They're going to surround themselves with people who just say what they want to hear. They will turn away their ears from the truth and turn aside to myths. And there were about 4 really key phrases in that passage that I think are important. To suit their own desires. In other words, we're selfish, and we want people to tell us what we want to hear. We want people to agree with us. We want to be amend. We want everybody to say things that make us feel what we already feel and to think what we already think. What our itching ears want to hear, because we have this desire for affirmation. I must be right. You ever turn on somebody and they're agreeing with you and you're like, yeah, right? And then it says they will turn their ears away from the truth. In other words, they'll hear something and they'll like it better than truth, so they'll turn, which is rejecting God, away from truth to something else, and that something else is called a myth. Okay? And a myth we talked about last week, that's a story we create to explain our world. We create myths to explain our world. A lot of times we think myths, we're thinking, Greek stuff with Zeus and Apollo. That's not it necessarily. As a matter of fact, it's usually not it. It's a story we tell that makes our world make sense. And let me quickly show you, I did this last week, what a myth looks like, or the concept of a myth. Make sure I'm do that wrong every time. Okay? There is what we believe is truth. Okay? And we believe it very strongly that God, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. There's creation, that humanity rebelled against God, and that created a fallenness, a cursedness in the universe that means we are drawn to God because we're made in the image of God, but we rejected God because of the fall, and so we move away from God. And so we're constantly in that tension of wanting to move toward God and also wanting to reject God and his principles. And so there's creation, there's fall, there's redemption of Jesus Christ on the cross, dying for our sins, and there's restoration, which is God restoring all creation back to what actually better than what it was to begin with. And so there's the truth, and people tend to go both ways on this one. At one point, people reject the foundations. And the foundations are God is the creator of the universe. There is a God. All these kind of things that are just the foundational truths. And then there are the principles that come out of that. The standards of God's standards. Okay, we'll talk a lot about that today. And when you reject these, what you end up with is a story, a way of explaining the universe that is a myth, that is false. Okay? And what we have to do as humans, we have to have a story that explains why we do what we do. But when we already know what we want to do, instead of saying, well, here's truth, I should adjust my life to truth, we create a story to live the way we want to live. Okay? Does that make any sense at all? If not, go back and watch last week because I explained it in much more detail. But there are myths, and the problem is that all of us, well, trash it. There we go. All of us are tempted that way. Okay? We deny the foundational truths or we deny the principles. And last week what we said was, how can we identify and overcome those myths that we are drawn to so strongly? We are drawn to them. How can I tell when I'm seeing a myth? But there's a deeper question, because there are people out there whose job is to sell us myths. Okay? That's what they do for a living. We also have a part of us deep inside that wants to create myths that allow us to live the way we want to live. So all of us have this drawing, and we have these siren song people who are announcing these things that sound good. They say what our itching ears want to hear. And they said, Paul said preachers and teachers, but reality, there's tons of people out there. There's authors, there's TV personalities, there's books, there's all kinds of things out there that are myth makers or myth sellers, that are drawing us to things that are not true. And by the way, do you know what the best kind of a myth is? If you're going to be effective with your myth, you're not going to go 180 degrees wrong, are you? You're going to take some foundational truths, and you're going to sprinkle in a few lies. You're going to take some good principles, and you're going to sprinkle in some good lies. So a good myth maker is not someone who comes up with some story whole cloth that goes against everything we believe. A good myth maker is someone who takes the story we have and, let's go ahead and use that word, perverts it to make a new story that sounds, you ready? Better than the original story. Better. Why better? Because it hits our selfish desires, it tickles our ears. See, if you read the New Testament, if you read the Gospels and you read Jesus, does Jesus ever say anything that doesn't tickle your ears? All the time. If you're paying attention, this dude, he's more offensive than I am, and that is a step. Okay? I mean, I've been at this a while, nobody's even talked about crucifying me. But Jesus offended people all the time. So it's not really all that hard to, make sure I get these air quotes right, to improve on the message of Jesus Christ. It's very easy to do because you take out the stuff that people find offensive and you replace it with stuff that tickles their itching ears. Okay? So last week we were talking about in ourselves. This week we're talking about ourselves, and also how can we identify myth makers and myth sellers in the world? How can we know that someone we're listening to is a myth maker? How can we tell that we are starting to write our own myths? Okay? So, how do we do that? Well, let's go backwards. First, tell you a little story. This past summer, I was on sabbatical, and we went to Israel. And while I'm in Israel, does your brain have an off switch? Mine doesn't even have something vaguely resembling an off switch. Kim talks about it all the time, that my brain is just... Eventually, I think it's just going to stop one day and collapse out, just fall out the front of my face. But while we're there, there's a couple passages that you've probably heard me talk about. It's been around a lot because they really impact me. But they were really, really, really digging into me. And the two passages, these are common. These aren't weird. These are not obscure passages. One of them is Galatians 5, which says the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. And the other one is from 1 Corinthians 13, which says love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. And those passages are just rolling around because so much of what I see of, to be honest, our culture and Christianity doesn't reflect those at all. So much of what I see in the church doesn't reflect those. And what I'm wrestling with is, how important should I view these two things? Are they crucial? Because you go to the Old Testament law, you'll find all kinds of stuff in there, and you go, well, that's there, but it's not that important. Where does this fit? How do verses like love is patient, love is kind, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, how does that fit? And Kim and I are in Israel, and we're near the Sea of Galilee, and we're walking up a hill toward a church. There's churches everywhere. And this is called the Church of the Beatitudes. And if you go into the Gospels, the very first sermon that's recorded that Jesus preached, which I think that usually means important, is in Matthew chapter 5. Jesus has just gone through all the preparation stuff, and he gives his very first sermon, and his first sermon that's recorded in the New Testament is the Sermon on the Mount. And it starts with the Beatitudes, and at the top of this hill is the Church of the Beatitudes. And what they have done is, you're walking the pathway up, and every few feet, there'll be one of the Beatitudes on a plaque. Some are in English, then different languages, and you can walk, and as you're walking, you're seeing the Beatitudes. And when you didn't know what a Beatitude was, and there's one of them, oh, I know those, this is a Beatitude. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they'll be called children of God. And they're every few feet, and I'm just walking along, and I've got these passages, and I'm going, wait a second. This is the same thing. Listen, this is not, the Beatitudes aren't something different. They're exactly what Paul was saying. Let's just read it real fast, okay? Jesus is teaching the first sermon, and he said, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are those who are pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. And it went, ting. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace. Love is patient, love is kind. Blessed are the poor in heart. It's all the same thing. If you take these two passages and hold them up beside the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount, you go, wait a second, Paul stole it. When Paul wrote what he wrote in 1 Corinthians and Galatians, he just stole what Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount and applied it in a different context. This is close to plagiarism, which he's allowed to do because he's working under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. But he is basically, when he says love is patient, love is kind, he's almost quoting Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. When he says the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, he's basically saying what Jesus said. They're the exact same things. And then it gets stronger and stranger. Because if you read the Beatitudes, they're not just Jesus' teaching. They're a reflection of his person. Jesus is all these things. At the end of it, he said, blessed are you when you're persecuted. And there's a really cool story. I shouldn't tell you this, it's going to take a little bit of time. But there's a really cool story about Jesus the night of the crucifixion. Because if you read the story of the Last Supper, it ends with, and they sang a hymn and went out to the Mount of Olives. And one of the really cool things that is true is we know the song they sang. We really do. It wasn't Amazing Grace because it was part of the Passover ritual. They were doing the Passover, and when they did the Passover, they sang Psalm, I believe it's 118. And one of the lines they would have sung as Jesus is leaving the Last Supper to go to his crucifixion is, "This is the day the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it." Blessed are those who are persecuted. And when Jesus is about to be persecuted to the full extent of persecution, he says, this is the day the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. So it's not just Jesus' teaching, it's who he is. And to take it one more step, if Jesus is God, this is a reflection of God's nature. The Beatitudes, love is patient, love is kind, the fruit of the Spirit, it's not just teaching, it's who God is. Matter of fact, let's just see how this worked out with the slides. If you take it out and you take the word love out and just plug in God, listen how this works. Is this true? God is patient, God is kind. He does not envy, he does not boast, he is not proud, he does not dishonor others. You can swap the word love for the word God and it works just as well. And when you talk about the fruit of the Spirit, God is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. And when I say it's Jesus' personality, this is how Jesus described himself. He said, take my yoke upon me and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls. It's all the same stuff. It's all the same thing. And it keeps going. The early church is going, and they need new leaders because, they've got lots more people. They need to develop new leaders. And so Paul is writing. He writes a couple letters to people on how do you identify leaders? How do you find the leaders for your new churches? You know what he says to them? He does it in the book of Timothy and Titus, 1 Timothy and Titus. He tells them how to identify leaders. And just here's what he says in Titus. Here's what he tells Titus. Since an overseer or an elder manages God's household, he must be blameless, not overbearing, not quick-tempered, not given to drunkenness, not violent, not pursuing dishonest gain. Rather, he must be hospitable, one who loves what is good, who is self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace. Blessed are the peacemakers. Love is patient, love is kind. Do the leaders look like that? They have very little about overall qualifications for leadership in there. They have a ton about the character of the leader and asking a very simple question. Do they look like Jesus? Is there a family resemblance between this person and Jesus? And if there is not, they're not qualified to be in leadership. He says the same thing to Timothy. An elder must be a man whose life is above reproach. He must be faithful to his wife. He must exercise self-control, fruit of the Spirit, self-control. Oh yeah, live wisely, have a good reputation. Talks about deacons. In the same way, deacons must be well respected, have integrity. Talks about the women in leadership in the same way their wives must be respected, must not slander others. They must exercise self-control and be faithful in everything they do. And then when his half-brother James is writing on what wisdom really looks like, he says, who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. And here's what it looks like. The wisdom that comes from heaven is, first of all, pure, peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. Blessed are the peacemakers. They're just using synonyms. They're just expressing the exact same truth in different phrases to different people, but the root never changes. From 1 Corinthians 13 and what love is, to Galatians 5 and what the fruit of the Spirit is, to Jesus on the Mount of Beatitudes. This is where a blessed person, a happy person looks like. Here's what a leader should look like. Here's what wisdom should look like. They all look exactly the same. They all look like Jesus. So how can we identify myth makers and myth sellers? Well, here's how Jesus put it. A tree is identified by its fruit. If a tree is good, its fruit will be good. If a tree is bad, its fruit will be bad. And by the way, if a tree is an apple, its fruit will be apple. So how do we identify the myth makers and myth sellers? How do we identify in our lives when we're moving into myths? How much do we look like Jesus? You're saying, are we talking about Christians or not Christians? Yes. God doesn't change. Even somebody, and this may be controversial, even somebody who is not a Christian, who is loving, who is joyful, and is patient, is reflecting God's nature. Right? You don't have to have everything to have something. And in the sense that the worst human on earth reflects some of God's nature, that is true. And in the ways they do not reflect God's nature, that is myth. Are you with me? Basically, the more a person rejects Jesus' principles, the less they'll look like him. So how do we know who to listen to? How do we know when our heart is going in a wrong direction? How do we know when we're going in a wrong direction? Now, before I get into my list, which I just pulled, all I did was I pulled like 4 of the biggest words out of there and found some contrast. Okay, that's all I'm going to do is take what I just told you and apply it. That's all we're going to do in just a minute. But I need to tell you something, because if you get into it, you might think, well, I mean, Steve, you don't fit that one all that well, because it says something about patience, and I know you. Okay, and so we're not looking for perfection here. One of the things we've learned as a church a long, long time ago was that when it comes to people, what we're looking for is their heart and their direction. Their heart and their direction. Does somebody want to be doing better? You got some people that are rebellious and they're just, there's not much you can do with somebody like that. But if somebody's got a good heart, I mean, a bunch of this room are probably thinking, I could never do anything valuable for God because I'm not going to measure up to all this stuff. And we would say, what's your heart and what's your direction? What's your heart? Is your heart to do better? What's your direction? Are you moving toward God? Not worry about how fast. Are you moving toward God? So if your heart and direction's good, we're going to give you a lot of passes. So when we talk about yourself, you see this list and you go, oh, I'm not good at that one. That's okay. It's not okay, but it's not like judging you. What's your heart? What's your direction? My heart is to do better. I'm moving in the right direction. If you're listening to a pastor, what's his heart? What's his direction? Anybody out there, what's their heart? What's their direction? Okay, does that make sense? All right, you ready to get into this? Because we're going to look at I'm just going to take, here's what I did. Now this is behind the scenes stuff. I identified 4 key words, and I basically got their opposites. This is not rocket science, okay? And I put them together. So if you're taking notes, if you know the first word, you're going to have a good shot at guessing the second one most of the time, okay? So, ready? Avoid arrogance, seek selflessness. In your own life, the person that you are, the person you're becoming, and the people you're listening to, because the people who are listening to are going to influence you towards something. Avoid arrogance, seek selflessness. I'll just reread some of the stuff we've already read. Love does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking. Jesus said, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Now, let's stop right there, because like meek and merciful, we're suddenly thinking weak. Right? Everybody's going, oh, we're supposed to be meek, quiet, boring people. That's not what meek means. That's not what merciful means. Easiest way to put it this way. Only a strong person can choose to be meek. If you're a milquetoast, you're not choosing to be meek. You don't have a choice. If you don't have any internal strength, you're not meek. You're weak. That's a totally different thing. Okay? So Jesus is talking about a strong person. The meek that will inherit the earth are the people who are strong enough to accomplish something and are choosing to be meek, to put themselves in the second seat, to not dominate everything they have. And only a powerful person can choose to show mercy. Only the person who is strong enough to not show mercy can show mercy. And so it's not a matter of weakness, it's a matter of choosing selflessness. And by the way, if you want to sum up Christianity and living as a Christian in one word, selflessness is probably it. If you want to sum up Jesus in one word, can you think of a better word than selflessness? I mean, if you can look in like Ephesians and Colossians, where they'll have this hymn about who Jesus is, who, being a very nature God, chose to set it aside and come to earth to die for our sins. That's not weak. It's incredibly powerful. And it's Jesus being selfless. Said, if you want one word to sum up Jesus, and then what we're called to be, if we want to look like Jesus, selfless is that word. Matter of fact, it says God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. If you want to look like Jesus, you have to fight your pride, work toward humility. And I'm going to say some things you may not like. You'll get over it. If you want to be humble, you're not going to get there following arrogant people. Okay? That's enough for now. Let's keep moving. Avoid anger. Seek joy. Avoid anger. Seek joy. Love is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. The fruit of the Spirit is forbearance, self-control. Human anger, this is a different place, James. Human anger does not produce the righteousness God desires. Can I say something really obvious? Because this is something, anger is one of my issues. I have to work on that. Joy is not really one of my bestest things because I do angry and I do all the other stuff. I have to work that way. But if I want to get to being a non-angry person, if I want to be a joyful person, well, a person who's perpetually angry cannot lead you to peace and joy. I swear, I look at some of the people out there who are influencers, and there's some of them, I really think all over the spectrum. I'm not talking about right, left, middle, entertainment, whatever. I'm talking there are people out there who I swear if they smiled, it would hurt so badly. You just look at their faces, and their face is such a twist. And anything they do, they look like they're mad about it. That's their hallmark, is they're mad. You know, what do you do for a living? I get on TV and I'm angry. I get on the internet and I'm angry. Oh, okay, well, that's definitely a fruit of the Spirit. I'm serious. I got a picture. I've got a few of them. I'm like, if they laughed, would they have to go to the ER? Because there might need to be drugs. There might need to be some sort of muscle relaxants involved to get their face to do that thing. Because they've been practicing so hard in the not smiling thing for so long, and they look angry all the time. I think they might need some form of muscle relaxants or even surgery. I've seen pictures of a couple of them when they're smiling, and I'm going, oh my gosh, that's terrible. Oh, that hurts. That looks like it hurts. It looks like it hurts so bad. I pray for them. I'm like, oh gosh, Lord, help them to get that thing off their face. That does not look pleasant at all. Okay? But a person who is living with God, who is in the presence of God, or is even reflecting God's nature in any way, should at least have a little bit of joy. You talk about, but Jesus, Steve, Jesus got mad. Yes, he did. But anytime Jesus expressed anger, it was about the rights of others, not his own. Jesus is going to the cross. All his rights are about to be taken away. And he said, this is the day the Lord's made. Oh, rejoice and be glad in it. Jesus, on the other hand, is standing in a room, and there's a man there with a shriveled hand. And it's the Sabbath, and you're not supposed to do stuff on the Sabbath. And all the religious leaders are going, you can't heal him on the Sabbath, Jesus. You can't heal him on the Sabbath. And it says Jesus looked at him. This is the Steve Davis translation, and was thoroughly pissed. He was furiously angry with them. Not because his rights were being violated, because that man needed mercy, and they didn't want to show him mercy because they had a rule. And Jesus, anytime Jesus got mad, it was because somebody else's rights were being violated. If you go, Jesus walks into the temple and he overturns the tables, and people love, Jesus is all excited, he's overturning tables. Why did Jesus go into the temple and overturn tables? There were a couple reasons. One is, what was happening was they were taking advantage of the poor. Because you couldn't just bring any sheep to sacrifice to the temple. If you're going to come to the temple, you had to have a sheep, and the sheep had to have a certification that a priest person had examined it, and it was pure. And the only way you could get that was to have a sheep that had gone through their process. And if you had sheep on your farm, none of them met that qualification. And plus, if you live 40 miles from Jerusalem, you ever tried to lug a sheep 40 miles? So you'd have to go to Jerusalem and buy their sheep, and they would overcharge for them. And if you were poor, it was a major sacrifice, and Jesus was ticked because they were taking advantage of the poor. That's one reason. The other thing is this. These tables, this is, some of you people don't know this, Bible geek time here. These tables were set up in the court of the Gentiles. The temple had sections. There was the holy place, and only the high priest could go there. There was like a priest section, only priests could go there. There was the men's section, only Jewish men can go here. Then there was the women's section, Jewish women could go here. And on the outside was the court of the Gentiles. It was the only place in the temple someone who was not a Jew could go to in Jerusalem in the temple area. They could go to the court of the Gentiles. That's the only place they were allowed. And where do you think they set up all the tables? The court of the Gentiles. They took the space out of the court of the Gentiles, and they turned it from being a place that was at least semi-holy to a place that was just a marketplace. And Gentiles could not get to God and the temple. And Jesus walked in, and he was furious. Not because they violated his rights, because they violated somebody else's. Anytime you see Jesus mad, it's not because somebody got on his bad side. It's because they did something to somebody else, and he wanted to protect them. But even when he was protecting, even when he was angry, there was one thing that flowed through him all the time. This is from a guy named Frederick Buechner. When Jesus talked to the Pharisees, he didn't say, there, everything's going to be all right, you jerks. He said, you brood of vipers. And here's the key. And he said that to them because he loved them. That's what they needed to hear. Jesus said what they needed to hear on the off chance they'd come to God. There's another great story about a guy. It's called the rich young ruler, and he's a very wealthy man, and his wealth owns him instead of him owning his wealth. And he comes to Jesus, and he says, how can I inherit eternal life? And Jesus, after a little conversation, tells him to sell everything you have, and then you can have, and give it to the poor, and then you can have eternal life. Because that was blocking him. He said, you've got to get rid of the blockage. But the key thing in that passage to me is, it says right before he tells him, you need to sell all your stuff, it says Jesus looked at him, you remember this? And loved him. And then he said something very strong, but very needed. So Jesus was always operating out of love. Even his anger was about love and moving people toward joy. Jesus said, I've come that you might have life and have it to the full. A full life involves joy. Jesus is always moving people toward joy. Always. So, here's just another verse for you. You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there's fullness of joy. One more just a little bit different than that one. I've got two more actually, but this one's next. Avoid the hot-headed, seek patience and kindness. I have to let you write that one for a second because it's bigger words. Avoid the hot-headed. That's different than anger. You can have controlled anger. I know people are very controlled and angry, but hot-headed means whoa all the time. But hot-headed means out of control. And that said, an elder must be blameless, not overbearing, not quick-tempered. And of course, Jesus said what love is patient, love is kind. And this is a crucial one here. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance. You know, that's a weird. Is that a weird word? When's the last time you used forbearance in a sentence? Well, forbear with me. It's like we suddenly moved back to 1843, right? We're suddenly a Victorian novel of some kind. Forbearance. And it's a modern translation. It's the New International Version. It's a very new translation. If you check most new translations, it's going to say patience right there. But they said forbearance, and I think they did the right thing. Because patience means when I'm stuck in line, I don't get upset. Patience means when the microwave is taking too long to make my popcorn, I'm adjusting. Forbearance is exclusively about people who are bothering you. Forbearance is patience with people, and isn't that the hardest kind of patience? Yeah, because people are right? People. And if you're going to be hot-headed, where does it show up? People. Those people. Right? But Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers, for they'll be called children of God, which is a big deal. Children of God. How do you do that? Be a peacemaker, not a hot-headed jerk. And it's let me throw this in. It's just sort of there. Talk about anger and hot-headedness. I mean, like I said earlier, as you know, today's September 11th, and a lot of times people joined. When I was younger, they joined the military on September the 12th because of anger, right? But what did every one of them have to learn very shortly thereafter? You can't work that way. A hot-headed, angry person runs in and gets themselves shot. That's how that works. Okay, it takes peace. It takes calm. You can't be hot-headed and succeed at much of anything. Okay? Work on being a peacemaker. So avoid the hot-headed, seek patience and kindness. And this was going to seem really obvious, but for some reason it stopped being obvious. So I'm going to put it out there. And you can just do with it what you want, because when it comes to your life and it comes to the people you're letting influence you, when it's who you are, who you're becoming, and the people who are influencing who you're becoming, avoid evil and seek good. I really don't believe I have to say that in church, but anymore I do. Avoid evil, seek good. When we talk about good means praiseworthy, blameless, exemplary. It means you have integrity. That's what that means. So seek that for yourself. And if you're going to follow somebody who looks like this, because this is what Jesus looks like. 1 Corinthians 13, love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. The fruit of the Spirit in Galatians is goodness. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, who seek to be righteous. And by righteous, I don't mean self-righteous. I don't mean acting all pious. I mean being a good person. They hunger and thirst for it. Anybody else in here do hangry? I am legendary for hangry. The two things you want to do with Steve is you make sure he is well-fed and has enough sleep. Matter of fact, Rich Culp, who he spoke there this summer, he's in Bolivia again right now, if I'm not mistaken. And he was asking some of our people who are about to travel on a mission trip with me, because he'd already been on one, said, what's Steve like on a mission trip? And he said, just keep him fed and well-rested. Actually, what he said was keep him with Mountain Dew and well-rested, but that's, yeah. Well, the way that I hunger and thirst for dinner and lunch and breakfast, it says hunger and thirst for righteousness that way. I mean, do you see the difference between just wanting it? I'd like a new something or other. I'd like this. No, I'm hungering and thirsting for righteousness. Being the person God created me to be is something that drives me, or it should be driving me the way that hunger drives me, the way that thirst drives me. Right now I want to grab some water. Anybody else thirsty? Just because we're talking about it. Suddenly, I need, and it's a need, it's not a want, and it reaches that level. And blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. An elder, it says about leaders, an elder must be blameless. One who loves what is good, who is self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined. And it says that deacons must be well-respected, have integrity. That's what it's supposed to look like. We're supposed to be, and like I said, you can plug different words into there. You could go through and take different words out of Galatians, out of Philippians, out of the Sermon on the Mount, and you could plug a bunch of them in, and you could do, I tried to find the 4 biggest ones and put the opposites on there so you have the contrast so you could see it. But do you see the big picture? And this is not, it's not just one word, it's this whole complex. And here, let's shift. We talked about ourselves, we talked about the people that we follow. Let's close by talking about the church. Because Paul said to the church in Philippi, do everything without grumbling or arguing, so that you may be blameless and pure. There it is again, right? The whole thing. And here's this part. Children of God without fault in a warped and crooked generation, then you will shine among them like